Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Not the first time. This has happened before. We've been here before. So we're asking why. Not the first time. The podcast.
All right, welcome to Not the First Time. This is a show where I, Rhett, sit down with Andrew and Cameron to try to figure out what the hell is actually going on in the world. The premise is simple. I bring questions that normal people are hopefully thinking, and they bring the history and political context to the topic. Together, we try to make sense of how we got here because none of us are experts. We're just three guys who believe that understanding the past is the only way to stop being surprised by the present. Today, I'm joined with Andrew Ekus. What's up, Ekus?
Howdy, howdy. Ready to get crude with it today, boys.
I'm also here with Cameron Sallard today. What's going on, Cameron?
What's good, boys? Good to be with you again.
So what's going on, guys? How are we feeling today? What's happening over in your world?
Well, it's been a couple weeks since we spoke with everyone. So the world has changed a little bit. I think we've gone from ceasefires that people don't like, countries weren't involved in, to opening up straits and then blockading them the next week. So I'm sorry that life and work has gotten in the way of us recording, but god damn, we missed a lot.
Well, Trump saw his shadow, so that means another 2 weeks of ceasefire. We're lucky. Also, I always wondered why Catholic churches had doctors hanging up on crosses everywhere. Trump finally
Valid
cleared that
point.
one up for me.
Valid point.
It all makes sense now.
The war aims have shifted, man. They moved the goalposts more than I've ever seen anyone move goalposts. It started with like freeing the people, and now it's like opening up the strait that was, as you mentioned, open before we started this.
It's just a web of confusion, I think, and it's super hard to keep on top of what the hell is actually happening. So probably pretty well correlated to what we're talking today is we're talking the strait being closed and what that means for the world. Today we're talking oil, the big O.
Oh, the big O, baby.
Hence Andrew's crude joke at the intro there. We're talking oil today. And I know when most people hear that, the first thing that comes to mind is the gas station and what it costs to fill up. What it cost you boys last time to fill up the tank?
Too much and
I hate
climbing.
I hate it. I drive a 2-door, pretty fuel-efficient car. It's crazy. I've got half the gallon capacity of like most normal cars, and it is an arm and a leg. So really appreciate that.
So joy, pure joy. So yeah, I think as most people, maybe you see oil in the news on a regular basis, and that makes sense. I mean, it's the version of oil that we interact with every day. But what we're going to get into goes much, much, much deeper than that. Oil is the single resource that shaped the entire 20th century, more so than any war, any president, any ideology. Oil determined who had power, who didn't, and how far countries are willing to go to get it and defend it. So at the start of the 1900s, I mean, I think I think we'll dive into this quite a bit, but oil was barely a factor in our daily lives. And then by late 20th century, a handful of countries in the Middle East could bring the American economy just to a halt by turning off a valve. And that actually happened. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But we're going to talk how we got here. And so this is part one. We're going to cover the early 20th century. And believe you me, there's enough in those years to keep us busy. I know Cameron and Andrew have been researching hard on what's going on here. So you boys feeling good about it?
I mean, it literally just flows through everything. When I was getting into the research, it really did feel like I was tapping into like a secret history of the world, like all told through oil, because it is everything. Like it dictates everything. And we'll definitely get into it, but just not enough people realize just how much of modern luxuries are tied into oil and oil consumption.
Yeah, it's when we first started out on this topic, we thought, we'll just do kind of an overview of the subject, give like a historical context and bring it back to what's going on in the world right now. And we started doing this and realized very quickly that the overview of the story is also insanely long. We're going to get some details and stuff, but throughout all of this, it's so vast, this topic, that we want to give sort of the things that you need to know to understand what's going on today. Ekis and I went back and forth on where we even start this, but we kind of honed in on the beginning of the 20th century. So that's really what we're going to do today.
Love it, love it. And I think the main theme that we always want to convey and share with our listeners, and thank you to those early listeners out there. It's been super impressive to have the support that we've had. So thank you guys for the feedback and the listening. We want you to be able to form an opinion instead of just reacting to headlines, and be able to know what is actually going on in this world that we live in. So with that, Cameron, you want to take us back to 1900?
Yeah, let's take us all the way back here. And when I first started writing this, you see like, hey, when was oil actually discovered? You like many things, you get hit with the Chinese discovered it, and it goes all the way back to like 600 BC. So we're not going to do
Thank
that.
God.
We're not going to start there. We're going to kind of get into the formation of the Middle East, where it leads us today. Yeah, dude, it's crazy. They actually used to use pipelines made of bamboo to transfer oil back in this like 600 BC. It's crazy. The way oil has been used, not even like before this, you get like kerosene lamps in the 1800s. It's part of our world, whether we knew it or not, throughout this time. But what it really starts to hit us is the 20th century, and specifically very early in the 20th century. So, during our little escapade here into oil, we're going to go through about 100 years, which in the grand scheme of things is not very much in history, but holy shit, the 20th century just laid the groundwork for everything. Yeah, so we're going to start with the history of oil in the 20th century and the years really preceding the First World War to start with. So to kind of get an understanding of what the shift was, oil was preceded by coal. And coal basically powered everything in the 19th century. And it was the predominant source for power basically globally. Unfortunately, we still have some powers that are still tied to coal, which is absolutely insane. The reasons that really we started to see the change is that the oil is a lot easier to transport than coal due to its liquid state. It burns a lot clearer, or cleanly rather, far more efficient. It's easier to control than coal, which specifically for our kind of topic here today means that it's easy to allow precise control in engines. So planes, ships, cars, things that you need for war. So basically, we're going to start there. So by 1908, the French and English had spent millions developing the oil fields in, of all places, Iran. So really tying it back to our first episode here, boys. So in fact, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company was founded in 1909 following the discovery of an oil field in Iran. So in 1914, the British government actually purchased 51% of that company. So they effectively nationalized the oil industry in Iran all the way back in 1914, which is just wild. A little side note there, though. In 1954, it was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company at that point, but they renamed themselves to the British Petroleum Company. You might recognize by its current name today, BP. So the British were really the first to recognize oil's military and economic uses. In fact, History Bro's favorite character, Winston Churchill, was one of the first people to realize the 20th century was going to be one with oil. With Winston Churchill, Rhett, you may recognize the name, but mostly from the prime minister position in World War II. Not a lot of people know his part in World War I. His position is the most British name ever, the First Lord of the Admiralty, which, good Lord.
Very distinguished.
It was indeed, yes. I know. I hate to admit that because we fought a whole war, so we didn't have to use their stupid, like, Britishisms, but that one is pretty
love
cool.
it.
And if I was in the Navy, First Lord of the Admiralty, not so bad.
Yeah, I want to be a first lord of anything, honestly.
Absolutely.
I'll take it.
So basically with Churchill, he was convinced that oil was going to be the next, the big commodity in the 20th century. Early in 1911, he became a staunch supporter of the efforts to modernize the British Navy. And basically, this decision by Churchill, although his record in the rest of the First World War gets a little bit shady, but this decision alone gave the English just a giant advantage in World War One once it eventually broke out. Little history reminder for you, Rhett. As you may recall, World War I was started in 1914 after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, not the band for all you Gen
Take
Zers
me
out
home.
there. That was an actual person. And as Ekis would probably agree, Ekis would agree with me, this is probably the most consequential event of the 20th century. Ekis, you want to elaborate on that?
1,000%. I think for anyone that is alive today, there was never a more consequential event in human history than the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That's because there is no World War II without a World War I. There were different wars fought for different reasons, but you could make a very valid argument that it was one giant war. And again, World War II is the worst thing to ever happen in human history, right? You have hundreds of millions of deaths, and it is directly linked to all of the events of World War I. So without this random Gavrilo Princip, who was an 18-year-old Serbian terrorist who decided to pull a pistol out and kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand, without that event, all of human history is different, and all of our lives today listening is different.
Yeah, there's really, you can't overstate it enough how important that one moment is. And ironically, Gavrilo Princip, his initial plan was to like kill him during a parade. A grenade went off and everything kind of went to shit. And so he sort of gave up, went to a cafe, and like 20 minutes later, Franz Ferdinand pulls up in his taxi, like right in front of the guy. And he's like, well, screw it. I'll just take the shot. So that's
it was a
fun
complete,
one for you.
It makes you believe in I mean, we'll have a whole episode on this eventually, but it's one of those things where like destiny, it makes you believe in destiny and fate, because if it wasn't for a wrong turn and like Cameron said, him pulling up to a cafe where he was sitting there drinking, he literally put down his espresso and pulled out a pistol and then shot him and caused 2 world wars. Like, it's insane.
We need to cover that. I want to learn more about what caused that, what brought that to
100%.
be, what the backlash was, why the backlash is there. But I am curious, while we're at this point here of good old Winston Churchill, that apparently is the history bro's favorite person here. What made him make that transition to oil away from coal? Was the writing on the wall that this was inevitably going to happen at some point? Or was he a visionary in doing this and got ahead of it before anybody else could?
Yeah, it's that's a great question. It was definitely inevitable to a certain extent. I mean, the first battles of World War II were fought on horseback and with French cavalries with like big hats and like big bright red jackets. And it was very Napoleonic War when it started because people didn't realize what war in the 20th century was going to look like. And for all of Churchill's faults in both World War I and World War II, he's definitely known for his ability to kind of view into the future and make plans off of that. I mean, famously, after World War II, he didn't want to celebrate the ending of the war. He wanted to immediately invade the USSR and take out Stalin. Like the guy, he had his faults, and man, did he love his whiskey, but or scotch. I don't know. He'd probably fucking kill me if he heard
all
that.
of it,
but
just any liquor.
Yeah, any liquor with that guy. But he really did see this one coming, and it wasn't like his idea. He sat down with members of like the British scientific community and other politicians who were already on it, but he was the highest member of the Navy at the time, and it really was him that pushed Britain into totally overhauling their Navy, which for, I don't know, 500 years had been the naval power of the world. And he was the one to basically switch them. And it became very apparent in even 1914 in the early months of the war that battleships and like planes and motorized vehicles were going to be a huge part of it. But it wasn't something people knew it going in, which is wild. And it also led to basically the casualties you see in the first few years of World War One. I mean, it was horrific all the way through it, but the first few years were just like men getting mowed down. As Dan Carlin calls it, it's the meat grinder. It's just brutal stuff.
Yeah, and that's an important point though to answer your question, Rhett, because like you and Cameron hit the nail on the head. You're going from horses and walking, which had been how you moved around the battlefield from the Romans up until Napoleon. You went from that to now you have cars, and now you have tanks, and now you have planes. And the armies that could use cars, right, to move supplies and equipment and troops had a huge advantage. The armies that could have planes, right, that could fly and gather intel and then drop bombs. The armies that could have tanks that could just bowl over barbed wire, right? Like those armies were outperforming all the other ones, which is eventually how the war ended. And all of that consumed a massive amount of oil. It was all oil that fed the cars, that fed the tanks, that fed the planes. And those armies saw the advantage. That's why in World War II, the German blitzkrieg is completely led by tanks and planes. Like, and I'm sure you're going to get into it, Cameron, but this is when that switch happened where the clear advantage from horsepower to automated vehicles, it just drank oil, first came into being.
So connect the dots for me here. Is he this madman that's like, we're gonna
Yeah.
get rid of horses? Get the hell off those four-legged creatures. We need to start building insane machinery that runs on this thing that we're extracting from the earth. Like, where's that parallel on thought process of transfers from here to there?
Well, let's not get a mistaken here. The British Navy wasn't rolling around in galleons and like man-o-war ships. Like by the turn of the 20th century, they had a very the most modernized navy on earth. It was just coal powered, and coal it's so much harder to transport. It's so much harder to get power out of, or as I mentioned, the preciseness of oil is really the key to it. It's coal takes you just burn it in a furnace, and the heat wavers, all that. With oil, you could basically supply your ships with something that was far easier to control. And that's what they saw here. When it comes to like the horses and stuff, Churchill really didn't have any part of that because he was on the Navy side. That was a lot of the French, like, artillery and cavalry, like on the ground in Belgium during the first like part of World War One. They just got mowed down. It was insane. I think Churchill probably had some things to say about that, but to his credit, he was basically a Navy man, and he changed it just by doing the Navy. So, let's kind of jump back into it. I mean, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand was a linchpin in history, as we've kind of discussed there. It unleashed far more destruction and death than possibly could have been imagined. There's no way that Gavrilo Princip in Serbia knew what was going to happen. There's no way the Austro-Hungarians knew the backlash that was going to happen from this. No one knew. And that's kind of what created such a fucking nutso war. The physical and like psychological damage it directly caused in World War I is still felt today. I mean, they're still finding bombs in eastern France that they dig up every year. But really, this war started because of a super complicated set of treaties and alliances. I mean, if anyone knows anything about World War I, it's basically everyone was dragged in because someone was friends with someone else. And it brought in more superpowers than the world had ever seen. The Napoleonic Wars is the closest thing we have in the late 1800s. But basically, this was on a different level because so many people were dragged in at literally the shot of that one bullet. Because if one country got attacked, basically all these other people had to do it. And why this is so important to us is because one of these so-called superpowers in 1914 was the Ottoman Empire. And that's kind of the point of all of this is we're not going to talk much about the Western Front here or the Eastern theater with Russia. Not too important to what we're talking about. Obviously, it's a topic in and of itself, but with the fall of the Ottoman Empire, we kind of get the remapping of the world that we know today. So that's where we're going to start with this. The Ottomans, they were initially aligned with Austro-Hungarians and Germany, so they were known as the Central Powers. On the other side, we get the British, the French, and the Russians, known as the Allied powers. Obviously, the U.S. joins the Allies in 1918, towards the end of the war, that kind of pushed the balances on the Western Front. But the reason the Ottoman Empire is so important to us is because of the location, but also because of World War I, the Ottoman Empire no longer exists. That chasm that it created, that power void, is what sets us up for the rest of the story.
Which is insane because, like, you have to understand that the Ottoman Empire too, like, they were a medieval empire that had existed for 500 years. They had stretched. I mean, they are so responsible for why Arab culture also spread all throughout the Middle East. They're even the reason why there's one Muslim majority European country in Bosnia, and that's because of the Ottomans. They had stretched that far to Austria. So, the Ottomans really were you could at one point call them the most powerful empire in the world around like the 1600s. Like you're talking about a storied, massive empire that came to its knees at World War One, which is another reason why that war is so fascinating.
When I hear Ottoman Empire goes, that's old. That goes way back, way back. And to hear that connected to, World War One in the 1900s is mind blowing to me. What comprised of the Ottoman Empire for context?
Well, it's funny you should ask here, right? It's so teeing me up for it. I mean, the Ottoman Empire, as Ikis just mentioned, it was more than 600 years old at the beginning of World War I. At its peak, it held large areas of Europe, stretching from Vienna to Greece, and major parts of the Middle East, including like modern-day Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. So fucking huge. And Ikis talked about like the rise of the Arab states after this. It is all directly related to this. This power vacuum that it left literally sets the stage for the rest of the story, but unfortunately sets the stage for our like modern foreign policy, which is why we had to start here to kind of give the context of it, because it was such an important breakup. So by the time World War I actually kicked off, it was consolidated mostly in modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and extended all the way down the Arabian Peninsula. By the time World War I broke out, this was not the peak of the Ottoman Empire's powers. They were definitely still a world power, but when you have an empire that lasted 600 years, stretching from Africa, Europe, all the way to the Middle East, this wasn't the heyday of the Ottoman Empire. We agree with that, Ikis?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, with any big world war, that's also the interesting point of World War One, is that the Ottoman Empire wasn't the only empire. Like the entire world in 1914 was still using this like a legacy, almost like a medieval system, where you still had the Russian Tsar, and you had the German Empire, and you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and you literally had these emperors sitting on thrones with scepters still. Like it was a very old world system. All of them would be destroyed. German Empire was destroyed. The Ottoman Empire was destroyed. They weren't the Soviets yet, but they went through their revolution during that, right?
Yeah,
You
the
had
Russians didn't
Empire
make it
that
through
fell.
this war.
Yeah, you had the Russian Empire that fell, and they had their Soviet Revolution. So you had these old legacy systems that were completely dismantled at the end of World War I, which kind of it wiped the slate clean to then let these new nation states take place.
Yeah. And honestly, ironically enough, I mean, due to its location, and as I mentioned, the British were kind of the first ones to do this at the start of the war. Everyone else would kind of play catch up from that point forward. But the Ottoman Empire could have easily stayed out of the war altogether, which is just wild to think about, because really early on in the war, it was seen more as a European war. It was Germany being pissed at the French, who were allied with the Russians, who were allied with the Serbs. Like, it was a very European war. But again, because of these complicated alliances, the Ottoman Empire was actually the first to attack Russia, which I thought was hilarious. If you know anything about attacking Russia, don't.
Doesn't work out too well.
Yeah, and what I thought was interesting is like most of these treaties and alliances were signed well before World War I started. I mean, it was really after Napoleon tore apart Europe that they started aligning like this. It wasn't until August of 1914 that the Ottomans had signed a secret alliance with the Germans. So again, totally unforced error on their behalf. Like they could have skated. They weren't even part of all these allegiances, but they signed this alliance with Germany during the war that basically kicked them into it. So again, little things in history that could have changed everything we view in history. But anyways, so signaling their involvement in the early campaigns, the British were extremely worried about basically two things: the India colony and their Persian territories, because they had already switched to oil in their navy. They knew how important their established areas in Iran were going to be. So they were the first to aid Russia in the area. So this really started in 1914, kind of the beginning of 1915. And the British were basically just aware of this importance of the area before everyone else did. And it wasn't until later in 1915 when the Germans and the Ottomans attempted to seize the Suez Canal. For our geography illiterate out there, the Suez Canal is just east of what you think of as Egypt in Africa. It's that little basically that break that separates the Arabian Peninsula from Africa. That's the Suez Canal. So extremely important for all sorts of different things. But oil transportation being kind of the key to that area as well.
In this time, like we're talking oil being transferred through the Suez Canal back in 1914, this time period, or is that a later occurrence where that starts to be like a major channel for oil trade?
This is where you start seeing the British really use the Suez Canal for, again, a couple of reasons. One is the transport from India, New Zealand, and Australia, because they are all part of the British Empire at this point. Being able to cut off the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa cut down the travel time in half for most of these places. And I'm from India, way more than half. But once they started realizing the shift in the war plans, they knew that this transportation, the strait essentially, was going to be a huge part of the war. And keeping that defended was a huge military strategy because of troops and troop movement, but a lot because of oil.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out like how globalized the world was becoming at this point, to where we are literally carving these channels into the earth. Right? Like you have the Panama Canal shortly before this, and then the Suez Canal, where world trade is so important. And globalization has now taken hold. That these routes were essential, right? Instead of going all the way around Africa, you can now cut through it. And this is when you start to see the globalization that will come to an insane, terrible, nasty head later on in the 20th century in terms of the global supply. But this is where it really begins.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to think of the Suez Canal in 1915 as the Strait of Hormuz in 2026. And the British would do basically anything they could to defend that. And it is important, like I mentioned, that we talk about the British Empire, because it is always important to remember. We're not talking like the tea drinking, soccer watching British people. The British Empire at the during World War I was fucking gigantic. We're talking the main forces battling the Ottoman Empire weren't actually the British forces. They were the Egyptian Expeditionary Force and the Indian Expeditionary Force, plus armies from New Zealand and Australia. Those were known as the Anzacs, which I'm going to give a little special shout out to the Anzacs. They are known for they know no fear. They fought against forces that were much larger than them in situations that were absolutely brutal, and they never surrendered. So as we record this, we are a week away from Anzac Day, which is April 25th. So shout out to my Anzacs out there.
We're a pro Anzac podcast here.
Yeah. Fucking badass stories. Like if you ever have time, look at the Anzacs during World War I, but then look at them during World War II as well, in Malaysia and the Philippines, and even fighting the Japanese as far as Papua New Guinea. Fucking awesome people.
Well, and it's to your point, like the British Empire at its height, you have like 25% of the world's population is under the British monarchy, which is absolutely insane to think about. And there was something like 400 million people in total were subjects. Again, this is where you have all of that territory and all of that trade. You have a global power that's trying to dictate that trade, which also comes into play in these sensitive regions like the Middle East.
connect that back to me. The Anzacs are part of Northern Africa. That's what you were talking about last, as parts of the British Empire. Where are the Anzacs from?
Yeah, so the Anzacs, Australia and New Zealand. I forget that AC. I'm sure armed combatants or something. Being part of the British Empire, that's why you see the Royal Jack still on their flags today. I mean, they're all part of the British Empire at the time. And just due to positioning and the need for troops in the Western Front, they spent a lot of their time in the Middle East during World War One, as well as defending the Russians in kind of the Battle of Gallipoli and all that stuff in the Russian territory. So they're sort of on the Eastern Front in the Middle East.
Would our
theater this
Aussie
entire
and our
time.
Kiwi friend be proud of the Anzacs, you think?
Absolutely. I've talked with our Aussie friend Matt a couple times about the Battle of Papua New Guinea, and it's awesome. And they actually know all about it. It is like a big thing of their history and a lot of pride from the Anzacs from both wars. And honestly, every other war since. They've been great allies for the British and the Americans basically since World War One. Anyways, so really with the foresight and the strategic position in the Middle East, the foresight to modernize their shipping and navies to oil led the British to incredible gains during this time and really empire-ending losses for the Ottomans. Like everything in World War I, though, the fall of the Ottomans did not happen quickly. The battles were incredibly hard fought in the Middle Eastern theater, oftentimes resulting in towns changing hands 4 or 5 times during the war. And a lot of that had to do with the horrific fighting conditions that we saw everywhere in this war, but especially on the Western Front, because the stalemate between the English and the French was, 4 years basically of them being dug in trench positions. The losses on the Western Front were crazy. And unfortunately, that really affected the Middle Eastern theater because the British and the French would constantly be calling troops back to their front. Obviously, when you're fighting wars in France, the French are going to be a little bit more jolly on the spot to have their troops there as opposed to fighting in the Middle East. But what that did is it really prolonged the war. The Ottomans were great fighters, but their leadership during this time was a fucking joke. Like they had rogue politicians, rogue leaders at the time leading different military expeditions without talking to anyone. It's actually really funny. It infuriated the Germans. Throughout the war, the German generals were fucking
Like you're not
so
following the
angry with the
rules.
Ottomans. It's
Just
so
because they're
funny.
bouncing all over the place, doing whatever they wanted and not following.
No, Rhett, literally one of the largest forces of the Ottoman Empire, they literally packed up and left one day and started fighting a holy war across today, like Iran, Pakistan, all the way up to like Tajikistan, which I think is where he was killed in 1924. What is that, 6 years after the war actually ended? Like these guys just went rogue, and it is hilarious reading the German generals' accounts of it because it was like, we haven't talked to this guy. He's like, we haven't talked to him in a week. Like, where the fuck is he? It's supposed to be battling in Egypt, and the guy was in like Iran. It was amazing. But honestly, all of that, like the Ottomans they did their job. They did a really good job fighting for those 4 years, but it led to just insane losses. The Ottoman Turks sustained anywhere from like 325,000 to 500,000 military deaths. You got to remember this part was all being fought in the Ottoman Empire. So we got another estimated 2 million civilians died in just World War I. This doesn't even count World War II yet. The British military also didn't fare that much better. They lost around 200,000 men just in the Middle East theater. And that number for the British is a lot more impactful than what it sounds like. The British were a naval power essentially for 300 years. They didn't have a big land army. So when they sent troops to France, it was like, I forget the exact numbers, but because you might remember, it's like 25,000 people or something like that were able to fight in the Western theater.
Yeah, it was never their specialty. It didn't, like you said, it was naval power. They never had a large land force. They were never, their military was not ever dependent or built on its land forces. They were completely dependent on their navy, and those losses, like even getting to like the Battle of Gallipoli, which was a disaster, Churchill was a part of. Those losses mean a lot to Cameron's point because they are so heavily dependent on their navy that anytime they suffered losses anywhere else or anytime their navy was hit, reverberations all throughout the empire.
these losses, these numbers that you're sharing are just out of this world. It's hard to comprehend losing that many people, that many civilians. Would the casualties have been as great as they were if it weren't for oil, or did oil make it be this brutal war and loss of life that we saw?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the destruction in this war came from the fact that we modernized so quickly. Like the ships were more powerful, the guns were more powerful, planes were able to carry bombs and drop them for the first time in history. It was devastation and destruction that the world had never seen. And that can't really be overstated in this war. That's why it lasted for 4 brutal years during this. And it's just the technology way advanced faster than the military tactics did.
Did oil change warfare, or did warfare reveal how important oil was to winning and victory and conquering? Was it chicken and before the egg, or the egg before the chicken, I guess is what I'm getting at.
It's interesting.
Because
I
I can see
feel
your
like
mind racing.
yeah, well, it's a really interesting question because I feel like oil had always existed, right? But when the technology, it's the internal combustion engine. Like I think it does start with like the car in a weird way. Like once the car was invented and we know didn't need horses anymore, it only took a matter of time until we were trying to fly one, until we're trying to put guns on one, right? It's kind of the same thing that we're seeing with drone technology. Or like once we had that, we're like, what is any single possible use of this that we can use militarily, commercially? And so I think the shift away from horses meant again that you can move troops to a place faster. You can stick guns to this thing that moves faster now. And so I think 100% warfare changed with oil, and warfare itself became something where the blood of the machine of war was now oil. Like it was just completely dependent on oil for everything, for munitions, for transportation, for everything. So I think this is when that shift happens, and I think 100% World War I is an example of oil changing warfare.
Yeah, and to the point that no one had ever seen it. So it was very hard for them to figure out how to fight this war with such new technology, and that's why you get such brutal numbers, and the casualty numbers are astronomical. We just didn't know exactly how much this would change the world, but it became very apparent very quickly how important oil was going to be. And that's why literally by 1915, the British were sending troops to the Suez Canal to fortify that in massive numbers because they knew the importance of that. And to the British credit, they never lost it. And that was a huge part of their campaign down there, which eventually included Gaza and Palestine, and they made it all the way to Baghdad. It took them a couple of tries, but eventually they did make it out there. And it really was the oil that caused them to defend so bitterly, and it's the oil that transforms everything that comes next. And although the British did eventually pick up these territories, which become incredibly important in the next part, it wasn't until the Arab Revolt of 1916 to 1918 that that things really started to change in the war in the Middle East. So it started on the Arabian Peninsula. So back then, Saudi Arabia wasn't a country. This was all still part of the Ottoman Empire, but the Arabian Peninsula has always been a very unique cultural center in antiquity, in modern history. It's always been there, and back then it was much more tribal. There's a reason that kind of the big religions come out of this area, but Islam got its foothold in the Arabian Peninsula because that area was actually known for a lot of occult worship. So tribes from all over the place would come into Saudi Arabia to worship at these various different locations on the peninsula. And eventually it kind of morphed into what we see today in like Islam being like the strong religion there. But back then it was different tribes, different people, different languages. It was just quasi-cultural. So to say the Arabian Peninsula, it's important. This is not Saudi Arabia, especially at this time. It is a patchwork of different tribes and beliefs all over the place. But during the Arab Revolt, we started to see a guerrilla force of all these different tribes come together. And it was really against the Ottoman Turks. They were tired of the subjugation, the not having the religious freedoms that they wanted, not being able to worship the way that they needed to, whatever, fermented this revolt. The problem is when you bring this many like warring tribes and different beliefs together, a lot of infighting. And it took a little bit of time for them to start working as a force that caused significant damage to the Ottoman Turks. And that was really spurred on smartly by the British. They fermented supported and supplied the revolt during this time to really tip the scales. So it was born in Mecca, but it was aimed at really establishing an Arab state and get rid of the Ottoman Turks, who has occupied the land for 600 years before. Started really poorly, but ultimately the British were able to bring in someone, you might recognize the name, but T.E. Lawrence, more famously known as Lawrence of Arabia, was brought in during this time to basically lead guerrilla forces. He fought on the ground. He is a fascinating character. Haven't seen the movie in a long time, but I kind of need to rewatch it after learning about him. Just total oddball, but he somehow got this guerrilla force together and they started making significant gains. Attacking Baghdad, they got all the way there. They had attacks in Gaza and Palestine all the way up to Jordan, and it was really that guerrilla warfare that kind of shifted this power balance and sort of created the Saudi Arabia that we know today.
But that's so fascinating because it's like the same strategies that like the US or CIA would use today, where they send in like an agent, right, to like lead Kurdish forces or like supply like the guerrillas in the area to then like fight the war. So it's fascinating to hear that they were using those tactics.
Western powers used to know that guerrilla warfare was really difficult to fight against, and then we got into Korea and Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, the fun ones. One last thing I'll say on Lawrence of Arabia, though, after the Arab Revolt, he was brought back in by his military officers, and the guy shows up in traditional Arab garb, like headscarf and everything, to this meeting, which is apparently like a big faux pas in the British Navy, but the guy just loved it and everyone just kind of accepted it. And the military commander was like, you know what, screw it, this guy's he's a weirdo, but he really embraced it. So it's a great story. It's a great person of history, honestly. Well, let's pick back up in 1918, when the British war machine really collapsed in Europe. The end of the war was near, at least on the Western Front. As we're going to kind of see, it never quite stabilizes out in the Middle East. From this moment forward, chaos. With little options left, the mortally wounded government of the Ottoman Empire had to agree to this armistice with the British. We talk about the Versailles Treaty all the time. I mean, Ikas, if you want to explain the Germans' thoughts on the Versailles Treaty and how that led to World War II, we can fill that in here because it's pretty wild.
Yeah, well, again, like at the top of this, when I said that there is no World War II without World War I, it's because of that treaty. And that's because at the end of World War I, you have 40 million dead and literally nothing gained. Like literally nothing was accomplished with this war other than the destruction of multiple countries. And Germany just happened to be on the losing side. And so the rest of the world essentially said, like, this has to be for something. Like, this has to be for something. So they really put all of the blame on Germany. They essentially said, Germany will now no longer ever have the army that it had before. So they weren't allowed to have an army. They had to pay an insane amount of reparations to the rest of the world. Sanctions placed on them. Like the empire of Germany was destroyed. Like Germany was essentially destroyed as a country. And because of that, it opened up a power vacuum for Hitler to then be like, literally to say, let's make Germany great again. Like our country was destroyed. The German people were once a strong, unified people. We used to be the central power of Europe. And now we've been destroyed by the rest of Europe. Let's rise up. Then you get World War II. And so these treaties, trying to mean well, can often cause a lot of problems and reverberations down the line that no one who puts these treaties together ever thinks about.
Yeah. And the reason I bring up the Treaty of Versailles is really the Treaty of Versailles to Germany is what the Armistice of Mudros is to the Ottoman Empire. Effectively happens at the same time towards the end of the war. This is what killed the Ottoman Empire. Like the Treaty of Versailles, it allowed for Allied control of key areas. So specifically here, the Black Sea ports. It formed territorial evacuations in Arab provinces. So that's what gave the foothold for Saudi Arabia to become a country, and most consequentially allowed for the Allies to obtain the right to occupy Ottoman territory, and this is in quotes, in case of disorder. That was the actual language that was laid out in this Armistice of Mudros. And effectively what that did is allowed the Western powers to say, oh, this area has strategic value to us because it will cause disorder if we don't control it. And all that did is it's just started eating away at the Ottoman Empire on all the key port cities, and it started suffocated the empire from the outside in. So what the Germans had to deal with in the Treaty of Versailles is what happened here with the Mudras. So just a consequential
it's
part of history.
it's literally just like to the victor goes the spoils, you know? I mean, it sounds like they literally just divided up this entire empire between themselves.
Yeah. So in addition to like the Western powers taking whatever land they wanted within what now is Turkey, so we can kind of get the border shrunken in a little bit. The death rattle of the Ottoman Empire is in Turkey. This is the sarcophagus that remained after the war. But with the Western powers eating away at all the territory, they also found themselves dealing with a bunch of foreign raiders, tribes, combatants attacking all throughout the country. And this was a country that originally had 3 million man army at the beginning of World War II, was essentially gone. Or sorry, World War I was effectively gone by this point. So just complete chaos. And that's sort of what led to the complete downfall of it. Is this is where one of those politicians took another army outside of the country to go fight his own like foreign wars. It's just a bunch of disorder, and that's it just ate away at the Ottoman Empire, and eventually there was nothing left, and they renamed it Turkey. What came next is extremely important to the rest of the story of oil. So following World War I, we saw the first real reformation of the Middle East in centuries. This is where we start getting the fall of the Ottoman Empire. We get new states such as Iraq, Syria, and Jordan come to life for the first time. But unfortunately for these people, independence from the Ottomans did not mean independence from the West. Known as the Mandate system at the time, instead of independence, many states were placed either under French or English control. So the French took Syria and Lebanon, and the British took Iraq, Jordan, and Palestine. Important to remember because eventually those countries would become their own states, but because of the foreign influence, we've just always been meddling in these places. But directly after World War II, the Mandate system set that precedent in motion. Basically, because white people don't do their homework either, when it came to these foreign nations and what the people wanted, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, we started drawing borders for countries that cut right through ethnic lines. Ask the Kurds all about that, but it caused so much tension because we didn't take the time to actually, the Kurds who do not have a country, strictly because of stuff like this. We just basically drew lines where we thought it was convenient, not worrying about who actually lived there.
It's insane how many problems of today, though, go back to that of like the art, and it goes back to your point, right, of Saudi Arabia being a big collection of tribes. I feel like that's most of the Middle East. Like the Middle East is not a homogenous group, like that you have many different cultures and languages and religions in the Middle East. And so when they literally dropped borders on one of the most politically, culturally, and ethnographically sensitive places on the world, wound it up and just hoped nothing would happen. And so many of those problems, and again, like the Kurds completely left out. They're a nation without a state. They're people that desperately want a country of their own that they don't have. Same with Palestine. All comes from when the British just arbitrarily drew borders. And it's just endlessly fascinating to me that so many problems come from that.
Were these lines like literally arbitrarily drawn, or was there means to what they were doing and how they were breaking it up? That there has to be some rhyme or reason to that.
They had more focus on which one of the European powers was going to hold what lands than they cared about who was actually living in those lands. So like the border of Iraq is essentially the eastern border of the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't they didn't do anything special there. They just took, okay, this is where it ends, and the British territories of Iran. Well, it's kind of unfair. It's not really a territory. It's weird history there, but they just kind of did it as what looked clean for the British and the French. Didn't fucking matter at all what the Middle Eastern people thought of it.
Does any of this map and these lines make sense when you add in oil to the equation and who has control over what areas and where production was coming from, or am I ahead of that being the realization here?
It's in the back of the minds of everyone here. We just fought the most deadly campaign in human history using oil, and effectively saw what the difference oil made during that conflict. So it's always in the back of the minds of everything. But this is also during the colonial heydays of the British and the French. They still had all these colonial possessions throughout the world. It wasn't until after World War II, kind of, that you started seeing the come down of all of that. So you got to view this as like a 20th century modern issue, but we still have countries that are using the mindset of the 19th, 18th, 17th century when it comes to taking foreign lands. And that's to say it was done fucking poorly.
Well, that's a good point, because it was a colonial system. I mean, it was the same thing that they would have done with any resource. Like, they were extracting spices from India, they were extracting gold from their colonies in South America, right? So oil was just another one of those resources in the Middle East that they were going to draw borders around and suck out of the local population to fuel their massive empire.
Why the hell are these Western countries feeling like they have the right, or act like they have the right, to go in there and just start extrapolating these resources, drawing these lines? That might be a whole... Yeah.
Right. Where do you want to start? You want to go to Cortez
That
and the
might be a
Spanish?
whole-
Yeah,
whole
that's gonna be
episode.
that's like the biggest question of history ever. There's a
Fair.
lot to go into that. I mean, in short, it's because they militarily were ruthlessly willing to crush their adversaries through military power and extract the resources. And if you wanted to try to stop them, you were certainly welcome to. But they would be just as ruthless back. That's in short, without like a 12-hour podcast to
Love
dive
it.
into that. That
Great
would be my
abbreviated response.
Yeah, I mean, it's really only like colonialism's only been thought of as like a negative thing since the 20th century. Before that, it was like empire building was the name of the game. I mean, the British literally controlled
This is
trade
what you
routes
did.
for hundreds of years because of their colonies and because of their explorers. And that didn't die during this period. It still was very much the norm for them to split countries like this and just say, all right, you half are French now. It's like this is just what they did.
Yeah, it was the same thing that the Romans' first colony, right, is in like Sardinia in the Mediterranean, and then they had a colony in Spain, and then eventually it spread out, right, and it was just that at a global scale. It was just global conquest. And when you run an empire, you subvert the local population and you extract all the resources. It just came to a watershed moment of barbarity and just inhumanity once you get into this era of history, because technology is catching up. Also, like there's civil actions in place where we start to look at what this is doing to humanity. But once you have something as big as the British Empire, there's no stopping it.
Yeah. And what all this did, this period, it directly influenced the geopolitical landscape that we see today. And it set the stage for decades of regional instability, and really the start of the Arab-Israeli conflict that, again, we're dealing with today. That's sort of where World War I falls in this, and the reformation of the Middle East, all leading into World War II, which Ikis and I could talk for days about World War II. This is something that there's different angles in every sense of the word that you could approach World War II. Just the magnitude of what it was it's truly hard to wrap your head around. But ultimately, the differences between World War I and World War II, they were fought for very different reasons. World War II ultimately became such a brutal, hate-filled, nationalistic war, literally fucking superior race type bullshit. There was no humanity for about, 10 years in the lead up to it and during World War II, that we sort of lost track. And with the advent of all these new weapon systems and new ships, and what became huge in World War II was the aircraft carrier. These all just led to more death and destruction, and oil had a huge part to play in that. This war of annihilation may have been the most deadly. No, it was the most deadly and destructive war in human history.
By far.
Yeah, that was dumb. I don't know why I wrote maybe. That was fucked stupid.
We just don't want to believe it.
You know, Thermopylae. We don't have real numbers there. No. But ultimately, like World War I, it was a won by oil. Even before the war began in Europe in 1939, the U.S. was on top of it. We were producing over 85% of Allied oil. And once the war actually began, our production only went up. Some crazy numbers. Between 1940 and 1945, the U.S. produced up to 4.7 million barrels per day. In contrast, to give you like an idea of what that looked like in World War II, Germany and Japan could only produce around 200,000 barrels per day collectively, and the U.S. was doing 4.7. Over the course of the war itself, the Allies actually utilized about 6 billion barrels of U.S. oil in that 6-year conflict.
Wow. It's also important to note that before the U.S. entered the war in World War II, we were selling this oil to the Nazis. Like we were taking any buyers that we could because we were producing so much. So in our neutrality, we were just raking in the dough from all this oil money.
Absolutely raking it in. And that's key there is the neutrality of it. Because we were neutral, you were allowed to double deal. You could sell oil to the French and sell oil to the Germans at the same time. But the problem that we ran into, and another sort of what would have been moment in history, is Pearl Harbor. And it famously, that's what dragged a U.S. population that wanted nothing to do with this war into the war, because we got attacked on our soil for the first time. Pearl Harbor really set it in motion. Famously, I know Ikis is going to know this one, but the Japanese admiral Izakuru Yamamoto is supposed to have said, quote, "I fear all we have done is awake a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve," about the U.S. after Pearl Harbor. And fuck, was he right?
What a statement.
And it was oil that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. That was a move for them to try and secure. I'm sure you can get into it, Cameron, but what I know about it is that Pearl Harbor happened because Japan needed oil, and they felt like that was their only move.
Yeah, basically because of what Japan was doing in China, the U.S. years before had started an embargo on Japan. They basically shut down the oil production outside, and Japan can't produce their own oil. That led to just massive economic devastation in Japan in the lead up to World War II. Not really realizing the damage we were doing. I mean, what the Japanese were doing in China is obviously fucking horrific. But by us cutting them off, it pissed off the Japanese so much that it led us to World War II. So it was because of our blockade on oil that led to this whole thing to begin with.
Which is crazy. That's why, like, again, when you learn this stuff, it is like a secret history because it's oil. It's directly oil that dragged the U.S. into World War II. And you do not have a U.S. superpower in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s without Pearl Harbor. And it's just insane.
What was
it
the strategic move
oil.
in Japan bombing Pearl Harbor for oil? Was it oil reserves that we had there? Was it refueling capabilities there? Like what? Connect those dots for me.
So, I mean, in the simplest terms, the objective with Pearl Harbor was to draw the American fleet back to either Pearl Harbor or destroy it to begin with. So some say we got extremely lucky. Some say maybe a little conspiratorially, but our aircraft carriers were not in Pearl Harbor at the time. They were supposed to be. We had 2, 4, something like that, that were supposed to be at Pearl Harbor that day, that if the Japanese were to have hit it, it would have disabled our fleet in the Philippines specifically, but really the Pacific theater in total. Like if Pearl Harbor went exactly the way that the Japanese had planned for it and all the ships would have been there, it would have been a fucking blow to the United States, and we wouldn't have been able to mount a comeback as fast as we did. But because, some ships were missing and we didn't get the knockout blow that we should have, the U.S. was able to rebound incredibly quickly. And with our dominance when it comes to factories and manufacturing, we were able to build back our fleet stronger and faster and better than ever, way quicker than the Japanese ever thought so. But that was ultimately their goal.
So if it went the way that they wanted it to, what would have changed for them oil production wise? I mean, they can't produce oil. They're relying on trade partners for oil. What would have changed in them being successful in Pearl Harbor with their oil supply?
Well, Japan at this point was a massive colonial power, just like Britain. Like they had all of Korea, right? They had areas of China. Like they were a massive empire at this time. So I feel like Cameron was saying they wanted to conquer all these oil-rich areas in Southeast Asia so that they could then extract those resources for themselves. But the U.S. was the problem there. Like the U.S. wasn't going to allow that, so they hoped that they could throw a big enough punch to either take out the U.S. Navy or pull them back. But it hit back. Like it backfired big time on them.
Yeah, and the big one in this one's the Philippines. That's what everyone was fighting over. And the U.S. basically got awarded the Philippines after the Spanish-American War in 1899. So we were stationed in the Philippines before the war. And our footprint was growing in the area, and they fucking hated it for obvious reasons. But the oil embargo was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back there. They wanted to take all these places to begin with, and if you knock out the fleet at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. wouldn't have the capabilities to defend, and ultimately we took it back, but we didn't really defend it. But those areas in Asia that we had before. So it was all a gain for them because Ekis is right. They became a colonial power very, very quickly. So from the onset of the war, the British had already identified British refineries throughout Europe. So they started precision bombing attacks almost immediately. The oil producing countries for the Axis powers, so the Germans, Italians during World War II, that was in Romania. So a lot of crazy, I actually didn't know this, Ekis, but a lot of military operations in Romania during basically throughout the entire war. It was producing almost all of the oil for the Axis powers. And the U.S. and the British went out of their way. And some of the coolest air raids at the time, they were totally revolutionary. There had never been anything like it. And they just started attacking Romania, forcing them to lose their oil reserves, lose their capabilities. And slowly but surely, you see the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force and their navies, they just can't produce at the same speed that the Allies were able to because we were strategically taking out their oil.
There's so many battles like that in World War II where when you get to the crux of it, it's oil. Like Stalingrad, which is the biggest battle of the war, which is in and of itself, if you looked at the Russian-German front in World War II, it's the most devastating, costly, tragic war just on itself, and it was just one theater of World War II. But you have millions and millions and millions and millions, probably tens. What is the total millions dead of Russians? It's tens of millions.
I think they claim
and a lot of that
20 or something.
20 million people, right? It's insane. And the Battle of Stalingrad, which is the biggest battle of that theater, was the Nazis trying to secure the oil fields that were in the Soviet Union. So again, you have tens of millions of deaths just right there to secure oil to continue to fund this war. So it's fascinating how many of these, like Pearl Harbor and Stalingrad, so it's two of the most famous
Where
battles.
was this in the
oil.
history books for us growing up? I mean, this is crazy to me that all of these battles, all these strategic moves are all based around security and affordability of being able to fuel their ships, get oil, or fuel their machines, whatever they needed to, gain control over these areas. Is oil's the hidden piece in all this, I guess? I mean, is that accurate to say? Is that oversimplification to say that this is all oil based?
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
That's literally the whole point of this. Is all of this is oil based. And it's not like we've turned the leaf in the 21st century where we've moved on from oil either. So that's why this is such a pertinent topic to talk about right now is look at the effects that it has had over the last 120 years in our history, and it's still being felt today. But this war of, 60 million people died in World War II. It was fought because of this. I mean, it got so dire in the Pacific theater, the Japanese started running crude, unrefined oil through their ships' engines because they just didn't have the capability to refine it anymore. But oh no, the brand new millions and millions of dollars worth of development, and first time they were out there, they would put unrefined oil in it because they didn't have the refinery capabilities left. And that's all that they had left to fight. I mean, the Japanese probably should have given up at that point, but that's for a different topic as well. But it got to that point where it was so important that that's like the last thing the Japanese did was just start running crude through everything just to try to fight another day.
Yeah, and it's one of the things of modern warfare where like war really it is logistics when you boil down to it. Like to win a war, it's logistics. That's all of it. Like sir, you have warriors and you train them and you have munitions, but it's logistics. It's getting things from point A to point B faster than your enemy can. And once a war like this starts, it all becomes about oil because you do not want to be the force on the battlefield that cannot fuel its trucks, that can't get more bullets to the front line, that can't get a plane to drop cargo. Like it all becomes about securing oil. And we're going to get into it with the next episode, but pretty much the entire U.S. foreign policy and every war that we fought from 2000 onward has directly been from oil. There's no any other way to shake it. Like it's oil. Like we fight wars for oil.
It's wild.
So yeah, it's that thread that goes through everything in terms of modern mechanized warfare.
Yeah, and we could honestly sit here all day and talk about the Pacific theater and the European theater. I know we have talked about it for hours on end. But
Many
what I want to
hours.
talk about with World War II is getting back to the Middle East. Really, the Middle East during World War II was very similar to the situation in World War I. The British made sure that their investments in colonies were super defended, and the French, basically tied up with their own bullshit back home, weren't able to have quite the influence that they did at the time. So the British ended up dealing with a lot of the turmoil and chaos in the region. Kind of a rundown: in 1941, the British had to put down a pro-Axis Iraqi coup, which I thought was interesting. So pro-Hitler Iraqis. Later that year, they had to invade Syria and Lebanon to remove the Vichy French, which, Rhett, for your clarification, the Vichy French were the pro-Hitler French. So Vichy France is not good. Anyways, in 1941, the British and Soviets had to invade Iran to secure vital oil fields. And these conflicts just kind of kept piling up on it. And it's directly because of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. They're just different rival factions, different need for power, control, stuff like that. And obviously, with this region being so heavily oil dependent, this is where you start getting the stakes in the ground of people basically claiming and defending the different oil fields. So basically, after World War II, the Middle East again saw massive changes. And this change really had to do with the French and English again fighting this brutal fucking war back home. And because of this, they'd finally reached a breaking point in their military, their people, everything. And it was kind of time to come home. Across all of Europe, they just wanted peace. So this is really when we started to see the shift in influence going from France and England and moving to its next chapter. And in the wake of all of this kind of shakeup, we start to see the independence of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the creation of the newest country, Israel. So adding to the religious tension, Israel's mere existence added fuel to the fire. But just as the plan included splitting Palestine directly in two, it was always going to create displaced populations and havoc amongst the people. Remember here, the Gaza and Palestine had only been under British rule since the beginning of World War I. So not even 35 years later, they were establishing a whole country within this region that has been plagued with differences since the biblical eras. So after Israel was established in 1948, the surrounding Arab states immediately attacked. Known as the Arab-Israeli War, this is the first of many conflicts that we see between the Jewish state and its Arab neighbors. And we're talking immediately after formation of Israel. It was threatened before it was actually done that that was going to be the result of it. But essentially because the British just split Palestine, Palestine that had been obviously in different hands throughout the years, but had basically been the same people for 2,000 years. The British came in and just split, and we put the Jewish state there, which, as you can probably tell, leads to where we are today. So we'll kind of get to that in the next few episodes, but it's important to realize that this is where Israel kind of joins the fray. All this period was marked with ethnic and religious tension. The post-war period in the Middle East is also known for the rise of oil. For the first time, really, there hasn't been gigantic wars being fought over their resources. So without the war, oil became a defining feature of global economies too. We started seeing this in everything from munitions and transportation, but this is where you start seeing the practical use of oil throughout plastics and all the different things that it's used in today. Because we weren't fighting wars, you actually got to see the usefulness of oil in different different industries across the board. And this is what led to just a gigantic bump in it as well. It was a military commodity for the longest time. And really after World War II, we started seeing the shift to all different sectors of our economy. Everyone and everything started to use oil, and the wealth that it created in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iran was transformative. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, I think it's important that we start kind of focusing in on them. In 1948, the Ghawar oil field, again, I apologize for my pronunciation. I'm sure I'm butchering it. But that was discovered in Saudi Arabia. It's the largest conventional oil field on Earth. By 1949, the Arabian American Oil Company, also known as AMCO, or Aramco, was producing 500,000 barrels per day just from this field. If you guys want to know about the progression, today, the Ghawar oil field produces roughly 5 million barrels per day.
What
insane.
anything but the
Nuts.
metric system, right? What is the actual measurement of a barrel? Do we know this? Like, what does that actually equate to? I mean, are we talking like the barrel that Donkey Kong holds over his head, that full of oil?
That is exactly what I was going to say. Think Donkey Kong
the
barrel.
traditional oil barrel that we see? Like, I've always been curious, and I obviously could look it up, but what is the actual quantity or measurement of a barrel?
I mean, they literally call them oil drums. Like that type of barrel, you call it an oil drum for a reason. That's the type of barrel that they use. So those giant ones, yeah, they're making 5 million of those a
That's
day
insane.
in Saudi Arabia. Fucking
I
nuts.
think it was a matter of like convenience, because I think those like 55-gallon or whatever drums were used for all sorts of things, and that's what they chose to transport oil in, and it just became through a like convention and convenience to be the standard measurement of like per barrel, because that's how it was getting transported. That's at least what I think, but I'm sure there's some other stuff there.
That sounds plausible, if not correct.
That sounds right.
all
We can move on.
How many are they producing a day nowadays?
5 million
with an
barrels
M.
a day.
Okay.
Yeah, with an M.
Mind blowing.
Yeah, it's a disgusting amount. I mean, this is why you see the wealth that we do today. It's not a coincidence that they're able to produce that much. You're going to see everyone with a fucking Bugatti.
And Armco was the one that runs this oil field or discovered this oil field there, Aramco.
Yeah, Aramco.
And who are the
ARAMCO.
owners of Aramco? I mean, is that British? I believe this starts to get into like the
So that was
lending
the
of.
Yeah, that's the Arabian American Oil Company. So that was developed by us in 1949. However, it was nationalized by the Saudi government by the 1980s. Didn't really matter. This is the moment that like our relationship with Saudi Arabia became a thing. And it actually, I found it very interesting. My favorite U.S. president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was the one who started this. I don't know if you knew this, Ikis, but aboard the USS Quincy, FDR and King Abdul Aziz Al Saud would meet and cement to our country's alliance. So before the Japanese ever even surrendered, the U.S. was making diplomatic moves to secure oil for the next century. U.S. business investment began pouring in, and by 1951, the U.S. had signed a mutual defense assistance agreement with the Saudis, ensuring that American military support to the defense of their oil assets. This started by FD fucking R.
I mean, today that alliance and that tension, it's still just as strong. I mean, it's just as important today. It's just fascinating that it goes back to that.
I was gonna say, can we talk a little bit about this like nationalization of oil and what that means? Because that is truly fascinating to me for us to say like, hey, as the United States, we are going to own and control this oil with you guys. And then, to my understanding, the conflict that comes when nationalization of oil fields or resources happen is a dramatic thing. And so, can we dive a little bit into that part and understand this nationalization piece versus shared ownership or how that works?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that we're not talking about like capitalist countries. So the way the U.S. does business and the way that we allocate our resources is very different than the rest of the world. Our nationalism is bringing in U.S. investment in companies. That's how we do it. But when you're talking about these countries, that don't have the tourism or the other industries that we do here in the US, the manufacturing, whatever, when you have such a dominant industry in your country like oil, it tends to get controlled by the government. And that's because it's such a vital importance to the people of the country. So if it's done correctly,
It's a
you're
revenue
able to pay for
generator
schools
too.
and yeah, like it's revenue for your entire country. So that if you made it private, your country doesn't have anything left. So it's sort of a necessity for a lot of places that nationalize big, important industry like this. We just don't do it here in the US.
Yeah, and I mean it makes total sense, right? Like if you have the most vital, crucial resource on human earth within your borders, it makes total sense to me for these leaders to be like, well, no, it's the government's. The government is going to control this oil and sell it on the open market. Why would we let Aramco and all these American oil companies take all of our oil and sell it on the open market, and we now become middlemen? Like, why wouldn't we bring that in? And that comes into play majorly in the latter half of the 20th century. But to me, that's how I see the difference is like when you nationalize, it's the government that is now controlling the oil and selling it on the open market. And when it's not nationalized, that's again when American greedy capitalists are taking it for themselves and making buckets of money.
Yeah, it's really a great question, Rhett, because it does all relate in the next 30 years of our story here, is the difference between
Well, it's what
companies
started
and-
in episode 1. It's what started the coup, the U.S. coup in Iran. It's because the Iranian Shah wanted to, or the Iranian leader wanted to nationalize the oil. He wanted to butt out all the American companies, take the oil for Iran, use that money to benefit his people, and we enacted a coup for that very reason. So it is a very good question.
yeah, I mean,
It comes into play a lot.
it's the same power that led us to support arguably the most repressive, misogynistic, and extremely rigid monarchy in the world. Like, Saudi Arabia is a bunch of different things. And the relationship we have and the dependency we created for oil has helped us overlook 14 hijackers in 9/11 being from Saudi Arabia, or our New York Times journalists getting bone sawed by the orders of their crown prince, allegedly. There's certain
Allegedly.
things that are so important that we just overlook what we consider common decency or American values because, hey, they've got the oil. And as we can see, it's so important during this time to control the oil that, hey, we'll overlook this. Fuck it. 14 of the 19, at least it wasn't all 19, baby.
Yeah, and it's a double. It's like a kill two birds with one stone thing for the U.S. because you now have these companies that can get filthy rich from selling oil, and we also now get more supply to fund our own war machine. So like it really is like if you peel back the curtain, it does just reveal the worst of what like a capitalistic war machine is in the U.S. where none of the people see it, right? Like the whole point of it is that no average citizen is seeing this money, but the Saudi princes are living in palaces with Bugattis, and U.S. oil barons are getting richer and richer.
And what kind of the defining aspect of this era after World War II and getting into the Cold War was the shift of powers. It didn't go from the foreign entanglements of France and England to, the people that were living there. It literally went from France and England stepping out and the US and the USSR stepping right in their place. And that sets the stage for everything else that happened. So it was France and England just couldn't do it anymore after both world wars. And so the US and USSR thought, all right, well, there's a power vacuum in the most important area in the world for energy. Let's do this. And that war of containment meant that both countries worked overtime to spread their global influence, regardless of who they were doing it over. And as Ikas mentioned, that led to our involvement in the Iranian coup that we talked about in the first episode in 1953. Like specifically, us starting to meddle here is setting the stage for the modern version of everything that we're talking about. We're doing the same battles over and over again. It's just using different weapons and different combatants.
And Cameron Cass, we like to say what? That it's not the first time.
Yep, there we go.
Not
Not the first time. And that's where it comes in. Honestly, I've been banging my head on the fucking desk this entire researching because it's like, God, this is not the first fucking time. It happens over and over again. It's like, God, learn something, anyone. In 1956, the U.S. effectively forced the British and the French out of Egypt after Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. I thought this was a fascinating story. This is Dwight D. Eisenhower. So in 1956, really the last refuge of British and English power in the region was in Egypt. Again, because the Suez Canal was so damn important. But fearing the Arab countries would flee to the Soviets, Eisenhower basically convinced the two former colonial powers to leave. Effectively ending the 50-year influence they had directly with their oil. But Eisenhower told them, fuck off. Either you guys leave or all these countries are going to go to the Soviets. And during the Cold War, the worst thing you could do was give the Soviets any more power.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought that was crazy.
That's crazy. Because
It
the
is.
same thing happens in Vietnam too, because then the French pull out around the same time in like the 60s of Vietnam, and then the U.S. goes in there to fill in the gap. And
Yeah,
we all
say
know
it
how
with me,
that
folks.
ends.
Not the first time.
Not the first time.
Well, essentially, the region finally rid themselves of these two foreign powers. But as I mentioned, with the world swept up in the Cold War fervor, the French and English were simply replaced by the U.S. and the Soviets. So they never really had a chance to become their own state. We just filled in immediately. In 57, Eisenhower Doctrine was formally established. Again, one of the lesser known doctrines. I didn't actually know of this one before getting into it, but essentially it established that any Middle Eastern country could request American economic or military aid if threatened by armed aggression from, quote, any nation controlled by international communism. So essentially, under the guise of like containment and fear of the Reds, we said any Middle Eastern country can come to us and we'll supply you with money and our military support. And actually, in 1958, Lebanon was the first to invoke the doctrine. And Eisenhower, sure as shit, sent 15,000 Marines to prevent a potential communist takeover. It also helped the Kingdom of Jordan influence or bolster its position and influence situations in Syria. So kind of started our foreign policy of fucking with all these countries with Eisenhower. Little more than just their oil stuff. The Cold War just added another element of being afraid of things. It just made things fucking worse.
And I assume that's because I'm sure that also boils down to oil, because I assume what they were afraid of is that if the Soviet and communist influence flooded into the Middle East, you now had communists running the oil supply. So I'm sure that
Yeah,
that was probably a big factor in that.
Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely. But yeah, so it started our track record of just foreign policy, not just business takeover and industrial strength and military power, whatever. It was our actual foreign policy that started to intervene in this area. And that was as early as 1953, but our actual doctrines in 57. So leading into the 60s, I mean, the 60s was marked in the Middle East with intense transformation politically and militarily, but oil itself was actually cheap. Production levels were the highest they've ever been, and advancements in pipeline construction. Oil was reaching Europe through the Mediterranean for the first time, really cutting down the cost of transportation as well. The U.S. was still leading the world in production, and the industry was being dominated by 7 major companies. Quickly, just the 7 sisters is what these were called, and these are important because they kind of laid the groundwork for the next part of this. But these are the Anglo-Persian Oil, so that's the British Petroleum, so BP. There was Gulf Oil, which is now Chevron. Royal Dutch Shell, which is now Shell. Standard Oil of California, which is now Chevron. Standard Oil of New Jersey, which was later Exxon and now Exxon Mobil. And Standard Oil of New Jersey, which was later Mobil and now Exxon Mobil. The last one, Texaco, which is now Chevron. So these companies are still here. They've actually consolidated their power, which, Jesus Christ. But back in the
that shouldn't concern
60s,
anyone.
what this consolidation of power did was take this natural resource that the countries have and give it to American capitalists. So basically, in response to our beautiful capitalistic greed, these companies started controlling everything, effectively freezing out the countries that produce the oil from the oil itself. And in response, we got the formation of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or as more commonly referred to as OPEC. These are Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela to start. And what it did was it managed the global oil supply, allowing them to influence prices and productions. But it led to a bunch of other unintended consequences. And for the sake of our sanity, boys, we're going to pick that up next week.
Yeah, I can't wait. There is so much juicy stuff to come ahead. I mean, God, there's so much to come. And I mean, to tease next episode, as Cameron was saying, production ramps up, but in the late 60s, we start to run out. The US literally starts to run out of oil, and the consequences to flow from that and what we do as oil junkies is quite the tale.
Yep. So
I can't believe I've never heard of the Seven Sisters prior to today. I've obviously heard of those companies that comprise the Seven Sisters, but you'd think somebody that's pretty much like running the world, you would have heard of that name brand, a little more well known, but that's crazy. I'm super excited to pick
up. Well, it might be due to the fact of the damage it created in the area, the long-term horrific consequences of 7 companies controlling this entire region. It's kind of why we're at where we're at. So there's a reason that we don't glorify the Seven Sisters, although we just rename them and still buy their fucking oil.
Yeah, well, it's crazy because these are like you see those names everywhere, and every time you go to fill up your car, you see these brand names, and you don't think twice. You really don't think twice about it. You want to get your gas and you want to get home so you can turn on TV, and you don't think twice about it. So it's fascinating, as we will get into, just the power and the command and the world order that these companies have. And we take it all for granted.
Yeah.
Remember these warmongering companies and people that are running these companies, are we going to get into their influence over political power and war in general?
Yeah.
100%.
Oh yeah.
Love it.
100%.
But I think it's important. Next time you fill up at a Shell station, remember, you're not just putting dead dinosaurs into your car. You're putting the blood, sweat, and tears of dead Middle Easterns in your car as well. And that's generations worth. So just remember all of the things going into your car and how it came to be.
Love it. It's not about finding the cheapest oil, people. It's about remembering the blood, sweat, and tears of the poor Middle Easterns that are going into it. Love it. Great spot to end. Cameron, thank you for that comprehensive rundown. That was truly incredible, and we spent quite some time going into that, as we suspected here, putting you guys on the spot, and hopefully we can come up with something here. A lot of the feedback I got from the last episode was people loved that we ended with what's still good in the world.
Hell yeah.
And so we got to keep that up. And I'm curious, we can go off the cuff on this one, be more prepared for the next one here, but what's still good in the world on your guys' opinions? What's still good in the world today?
Today, Meg and I, we went to a little park that's by our house. There was a new opening of like a bell ceremony. A local artist created a bell that had artwork of like local attractions and kind of references to our neighborhood. And our local representative was there. Our congressman was there. And there was like 40 people at this thing, but he took time out of his day to come to this. He gave a whole speech about the importance of the Constitution. He went around and shook all of our hands. And I just thought it was great that there are still, local representatives, congressmen. There's still people in government that do actually genuinely care. This guy could have been doing God knows what on like an airplane somewhere in Dubai, but instead he was at this little park in Philadelphia, meeting people, shaking hands, and I just thought it was wonderful to see.
Love it. Cameron, you got anything, or you still need to come up with something?
No, you know what? I'm going to give a shout out to women's sports. We are living in the renaissance of women's sports, gentlemen, and it's fucking awesome. As we're sitting here in Denver, we just got our professional women's soccer team, the Denver Summit. Mile High Stadium here sold out, the biggest crowd for a women's soccer game in the league's history. Fucking awesome. And then just yesterday, the WNBA, which has been fighting for just a better share of the pie, the overall profit sharing from the league. It's been a brutal battle. The athletes they're not getting paid what they think they should be paid, whatever. But they got a collective bargaining agreement this year, and just yesterday the number 1 pick, Aziz Fudd, was selected by the Dallas Wings. Her guaranteed salary for the first the top pick is set to earn $500,000. which is a significant height from the previous season. It's 6 times higher than Paige Becker got last year at this time. So I want to give a special shout out to women's sports, basketball, soccer, and hockey. They're doing fucking awesome, and I think it's cool that we're seeing an entire new sports leagues and divisions and competitions starting before our eyes. So special shout out to women.
I love
Love
it. We
it.
got a long way to go, but I love seeing the progress. And like you said, like that big salary bump, it needs to get higher, but I love to see it.
So cool. And Cameron, you and I being in Denver, we were out the weekend of the first women's soccer game at Mile High Empower. And they damn near sold out the stadium, which is crazy. I mean, they were bringing like football sized
Incredible.
crowds for their women's soccer team here in Denver, which is awesome.
Love it.
Andrew, I love the regular history that's just going on in Philly all the time that you're so keyed into there. It's so awesome to hear that. My story of the week is there's a hospital. The story revolves around this hospital in Colorado. I'm pretty sure it's a hospital out in Rifle, Grand River Health. So Western Slope, super small hospital, whatever. But there is a lady there that her mom used to go to that hospital to get medical attention, and it's a Spanish speaking family. And the daughter, when she's 5, 6, 7 years old, was always the translator for her mother, from the doctors to her mother. And this story talks about the pressure that she had as a child trying to relay medical vocabulary and words in her second language to her mom in Spanish, and how stressful it was. And it's a story that happens across the nation in these rooms. And a lot of hospitals, according to this article here, have outsourced translator capabilities, and so they've done virtual translators and just you relied on kids and family to be able to make that connection for the patient. And this hospital has now turned a lot of their investment to actually hiring like on-staff translators there. And so they start off by hiring 10, and they said that they've seen this massive increase in patient like retention of what's going on, obviously care for the patients, acceptance of the care, and just overall seeing a super big benefit of it. And so I just thought it was super cool that in this world of making money and being super quick to medical diagnoses and doing things in such a quick way that they took a moment to pause to actually help some people out. And so that was my what's good in the world today. I thought it was awesome.
That is
Love that.
awesome. I love that. And honestly, when you started with there's a rural hospital in this country, I was afraid you were going to end with like
In
something
Rifle.
horrific.
Yeah.
Like funding was pulled, children died. But no, way to
You would
that was
think it went
good.
the other way.
Yeah,
It
fuck
went,
yeah.
it went
You
the
know,
other
that
way.
it makes that story even more powerful because Rifle is like, for anyone that doesn't know, it's not a big like city that has like a lot of resources at its power. So the fact that they did go out of the way to be inclusive like that is truly amazing.
But cool. All right, fellas. Great episode today. Let's run it back next time with part 2 of, I don't know,
Big
3,
O.
4, 5, 6. But part 2 of the Big O will come next time. Next time we talk. So all right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, boys.
Stay safe out there.